Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to my channel. My name is Frank, and today we're talking about priming. So everybody wants this nice, smooth, glossy finish on their 3D prints. They want to know how to get rid of all the layer lines, how to prime it, how to paint it, how to polish it. And in this series of videos, really however many I feel like making, I'm going to be talking about different tips and tricks I've learned throughout, years of painting different things, models, cars, 3D prints, and just kind of explaining to you the things I look out for and different, techniques I apply to this. This isn't a tutorial because I could spend days teaching you guys how to paint the perfect print, and then you can go and apply that in whatever area you live in, but you're using different paint. How long did that paint sit on the shelf? What kind of primer did you use? How long did you shake it? How long did you shake it the last time you used it? Did it sit in a hot environment or cold environment? How far away are you spraying? There are just so many variables when it comes to this stuff that even if I give you a step-by-step guide, it may never actually work out for you. So you kind of have to get out there and experiment by yourself with testing, crappy old broken prints. And that's what actually we're going to be doing. I was able to get my hands on 5 different types of primers, and that was just at one store. And they all have different kind of applications and results, and they all have to be kind of handled a different way. So we're going to go through and kind of sand down and play with a couple of my old throwaway crap prints, and we're going to see different applications and what the primer actually does and how to actually handle it and deal with it. So whether you want to believe it or not, there is no filler primer anywhere on this part. This was all sanded down, normally primed, painted, clear coated, polished, buffed, waxed. All right, so you can get this type of finish without dumping absolute buttloads of filler primer on a print. Because if you start using too much filler primer, you're going to start to lose some of these details. But there are ways to get those details back once you've, started doing it that way. Now, this is just the way I do it. You can use filler primer all you want, but again, experiment with it and see what it gets you. So I've already showed you guys how I sanded. You can go watch my PLA smoothing tutorial on how to use an electric palm sander and smooth really big 3D prints and get them nice down without any layer lines, and it really doesn't take long. That's actually what I'm going to be doing to all of these prints, but that's a whole different tutorial. Go watch that. Come back to this so you're kind of caught up. For this, I'm going to be messing with 5 different types of primers. We have normal automotive primer, and this is more made for metal, but it does actually interact pretty well with plastic, and it comes out just fine. High build filler primer, which it does exactly what it says it does. It fills up, it builds up on the layers, it fills up gaps. This is really good for hiding layer lines, but again, it can kind of hide and ruin your detail. I've actually never used this stuff before. I found this at the store. It's just straight up plastic primer. So I'm actually excited to see how this turns out compared to the other primers I'm used to using. This is the one I use more than anything. This is just normal sandable primer. It doesn't build up as high, but it gives it more of a textured surface that when you actually sand it, even with 200 grit sandpaper, it actually makes it really smooth and ready for painting. And this is actually what I used on my entire suit. This is flat white Rust-Oleum Primer. And I want to say this is a little bit denser than the sandable primer, but nowhere near as dense as the filler primer. And this stuff goes on great. It covers beautifully. It'll cover almost any color. And if you ever painted something like red plastic or, try to cover red paint, this white paint will cover it just fine and without any of the red bleeding through. So we're going to pay attention to which ones we use, and we're going to get some things sanded down. I'm going to half-ass sand some of them. I'm going to sand some of them better because I want to show you guys the effects of layer lines bleeding through and what your prep work can look like and how it can impact you. I'm going to use these parts for the entire tutorial series. When we're going to paint them, we're going to clear coat them, we're going to buff and polish them, and you'll be able to see a different range of finished products depending on the prep work you put into it. If you've ever done any type of automotive body work or heard anybody talk about it, prep is key. If there is the most important step in painting, it is right now. It is your prep and primer stage. How well did you sand it? How well did you prime it? And you will rinse and repeat that, because if you did a crap job sanding your print and there's layer lines and it looks like dookie, painting it is not going to hide that. That is going to bleed through, especially if you can still see it in the primer stage. So let me get this sanded down. We'll go into the paint booth and we'll start. All right, guys. So we're in the little paint booth. A couple things I want to cover real quick. I can't speak to your painting area. I can't tell you, hey, you need a paint booth like this. You might not be able to make a paint booth like this. You want as current and breeze free and dust free of an environment as possible. It could be in your shed. You can get a little storage container and make a little paint booth. Be well ventilated. And make sure you have a good mask on. This is not a good mask. I don't know where my respirator is. Don't use a surgical face mask like this. This is good for like wood sawdust and stuff. but the fumes and chemicals from spray paint, not good. Don't worry about me. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm fine. I don't care. Also, print quality. I didn't really cover that before. I cannot also speak for how good are your prints coming out. Now, on some of these, you can still see some of the layer lines. I sanded this down real quick with a sandpaper, but you know, if your prints are coming out really bad, there's a lot of layer lines, you're having under extrusion or over extrusion, I can't help you with that in this video. I have other videos explaining, you know, troubleshooting and tutorials and builds and settings, so you can go look at those. But if your prints are coming out uber bad, this isn't the tutorial for you. Some of it can be saved with filler primer. Really bad prints sometimes can maybe be saved with like Bondo and, you know, really big high build stuff, but that's not what this is. I'm trying to teach you guys how to avoid that kind of stuff. So get your prints coming out nicer, and that really helps you with the sanding process. The less layer lines that are on your prints when you print them, the less sanding and filling you'll have to actually do. I do have a multitude of couple prints that came out with different qualities, so we're gonna see how it goes. I sanded half of the parts, so once they're done, I'll be able to compare like how well did certain things cover layer lines. I sanded half of them with my electric sander, but I went over all of them with 150 grit sandpaper. This is like my go-to before priming. It cuts just enough where it smooths everything down, but it doesn't actually, it won't take forever and it doesn't gunk up. Always shake your cans of spray paint, read them. That's probably the best advice I can give you for any type of painting tutorial. Read the back of the can. The instructions on it are typically pretty good. So for something like a Sanibel primer, this can go on pretty wet and it really doesn't run too bad. Again, distance, you want to kind of pay attention to distance. If you're starting to run, stop, let it dry, sand it back down. But what's nice about the primer stage is if it runs a little bit, it's not the end of the world. I wanted to spray some kind of low detail things just to show you guys the surface that this gives you in the end. Because like I said, this is kind of my preferred primer to use. This automotive primer goes on beautifully. This is why you want to be in a dust-free environment. While I was spraying, I was actually kicking up some dust onto the print, but we're in the primer stage, so I really don't care. Now, you can actually already see, hopefully, I only sanded half of this. The same way I sanded this. This side's kind of smooth, like there's already a reflection. Obviously, this is still wet. It's a little bubbly, that's fine. But if we go over to this side with the reflection, you can still see the layer lines. So this isn't really a high build at all, but it is gonna give you a nice primed surface. This is the plastic primer I haven't used yet, so I'm actually kind of excited to see how it comes out. It has some pretty good coverage to it actually, and it's not running too easily. This actually went on pretty good. These parts were already primed in white. I just want to see what the texture feels like and if they actually would cover up any more of the layer lines I had in it. But it actually did a pretty good job. Same with this piece, half of it was sanded. And then, not bad, a little heavy. And then this side, you still got the lines. Not too bad. It covered this pretty good. Now, hey, our first problem's revealed. So you see all these bubbles forming? This part I actually did something on. I rubbed my hands all over this part. And what that does is it gets oil, the oil from your hands and fingers, stays on the plastic, and then it makes the paint fail. If you ever have these little dots and bubbles pop up, it's an adhesion problem typically. And most of the time it comes from oils or your parts not being clean before painting. And I wasn't sure which one I did. I did one or the other, and this one was nice and clean. This one wasn't. And there's the problem. So when it dries, we can sand it down. Sometimes you can chase it and you can actually just cover it back up with more primer, but we're gonna see how it goes. Now these are the important parts. These are very high detailed parts. This was done with my electric palm sander. This was done by hand sanding. And I'm gonna use the filler primer on these because I wanna see just how much detail I can retain or lose. So these are gonna get covered. If your finger's getting tired, buy a little cheap paint gun. They cost about $5 and it gives you a nice grip. So that covered pretty good. I still got some layer lines hiding in there, but not too bad. And this is the part I didn't use the electric sander on. Right off the bat, this one has so many worse layer lines sitting on it because really there was really not much sanding prep done for this. You could continue to build this up with filler primer, layer and layer and coat after coat. Already the difference between sanding one, taking time to sand one and not the other is, I mean, might not be able to see it in this, but it is absolutely night and day. Last up is this double coverage ultra flat white primer, and it's going over red. Uh-oh, I went too heavy and there's a drip. What are we gonna do? We're gonna leave it and sand it down later. So I use the electric sander on this side. This side's actually nice and smooth. This stuff covers very, very, very well. It has a lot of misting. It's gonna give you a rough kind of finish. But when you sand it down, it'll be nice. I have some lines showing through this side. Really no lines showing through this side. But oh no, you can see where all of my supports were on the top of the print. And I'm gonna show you how to cover that up. Usually I won't put any filler putty or any type of filler product on my supports areas until I prime it at least once. This way when I sand it, I can see where everything is and I get a little bit better adhesion. So everything's in there primed, drying. We're gonna let that go for a little bit and then we'll get to the sanding and seeing how they look afterwards. So I just came back in and I just hit these with a second coat. It was pretty much the same process I did for the first one. Just spraying them, trying to get any of the little problem areas or spots that didn't look like they got covered well the first time. And while this dries, I want to show you guys two things. One, I want to show you what to kind of look for when you're actually spraying, and we can use this little analog here. So we'll use, which one do I have way too much of? Which one runs the easiest? This one. We're going to spray on the little wall right here. I always do like a little test shot. Now, you can go for coverage, right? What I look for, you go and you can see how much splatter comes from this one alone, right? Not all are going to be like this. So you want to get good coverage, but you don't want to be too close because then you'll start to build up too wet. And then you can see it start to run real bad. And once it starts running, you're kind of dead in the water. So you really just want to be careful, maintain a good distance. Little spurts work out the best, light coats. And then as you can start to build up, you can aim to make a more wet coat. And good lighting helps this a lot. Being able to actually see and look around and see where that has that nice glossy shine, that's a nice wet coat. It's going to dry nice and smooth, but if you stay too far back, it'll start to build up and mist and splatter. Let's see how this black turns out over top of the nice fresh wet white. Those do not like mixing, and you can see where all my runs and my drips were. And I can force one on myself, and you can actually see it running just fine. If I stay far enough away, it actually doesn't run too bad. But I can really stay close and make it run. That's not what you want. You never want to spray paint that close. That would just be bad. And if you're too far away, you're not going to get good coverage. So in my infinite wisdom, I totally forgot to film myself filling the top cap right there with a little bit of wood filler. So I want to show you guys how I actually spread it on with this little crappy faceplate. So you can get it in a tube or a tub, open it up, wear gloves. I have a good cleaning solvent that takes this stuff off my fingers. But what I'll do is I'll grab a little bit, something like that. And that's roughly what I used on the top of the dome. And all you do, just spread it around. It'll stick pretty well, especially to sanded and especially to primed parts. And I'll smooth it around and I'll build it up as high as possible in those real bad problem areas. And more is more in this situation because this stuff sands very, very easily. So you're not going to be sitting there for hours just trying to cut this down like you would with Bondo or super glue and baking soda, which are both great to use if you're comfortable using them. But as just a little quick fill analog, this stuff is amazing. So, and then you can actually kind of use another part of the print to kind of wipe your finger off if you need to. But I don't recommend doing it like that. Wear gloves. So it's smoothed on and this will sand out perfectly. And this is already applied to the top of the dome over there. I applied it, did my second coat. Didn't realize I didn't film it. It's all rough and bumpy up here, but where the layer lines were and where the support material broke off, it's all covered up. So this is actually dry already. Actually, all this primer is dry. The white primer dried really quickly. This stuff dries in like half an hour. If you can get it on there really, really smooth and thin, it'll dry 10, 15 minutes. So actually, this paint's still just a little tacky, so we're going to let this dry a little bit more, and then we're going to go through and kind of sand all these down and see what they do to the sandpaper as we sand them. All right, guys, so we're all good. Everything's dry. So I'm going to go through. We're going to look at how everything laid down, the pros and cons of it, and then we're going to actually try to sand some of it down. I apologize for the flashing. I was able to mitigate it a little bit with my frames per second, but hopefully it's not giving anybody any seizures or anything. But when I get up close, it kind of mitigates it. So this is the black Sanibel Primer. This is what I like to use more than anything. And it covers really nicely. And this is unsanded, the primer at least. I haven't sanded it yet. So still some layer lines there, but not too bad. And then this part came out really nice. You can still see some of the lines on the unsanded side. but the smooth side looks great, and you can see that one deep layer line. So I could fill that with like some wood filler. Now the automotive primer, I liked how this stuff laid down. This came out the smoothest by far, just right out of the can, and I got a little bit of gunk right in there, so that's my fault, but not too bad. As for covering layer lines, not too effective at it. Let's see. Yeah, not too bad. It filled in a little bit, but for a nice smooth finish, I'd probably go with this one too. This plastic primer, I'm still really excited to use this on some paint, get some paint on this, because it feels different than all the other primers. It's a little bumpy, a little textured. Not too bad though, but it feels different than the others. So more to come on this. And then the infamous filler primer. Yeah, woo. So I went pretty heavy on the part I didn't really sand too well, just to see how it filled everything in, and it didn't do too bad of a job, but you can still see a pretty clear difference in the actual quality of them. So not too bad. So yeah, not the worst thing. And then the side I actually did sand came out much better, but it is starting to kind of fill in some of those detail lines that I was talking about, especially where it bleeds and builds up. But it did a real good job of filling in here, the spots that you really otherwise wouldn't be able to sand. And then you can see where I had some crud and stringing. And then this Ultra Cover Flat White Primer. I like this stuff a lot. You can see on this side, you can still see a lot of the layer lines, and not too bad. Wow, this is kind of annoying, isn't it? I gotta figure this out, why it's reflecting and doing all this. So that's not bad. I think if I get closer, it gets worse. Yeah, kind of. All right. So this side's pretty smooth. This is the side I sanded and actually erased all the layer lines. And you can see them pretty bad on this side. And that filler primer is all nice and dried, so we're going to look at that too. So we'll start off with this black, the Sanibel Primer. Not bad, actually. This smoothed out very well. This is 150 grit, and it's really not leaving too many scratches at all. You can still see the lines, so I could probably get rid of these layer lines with another coat of this, but pre-sanding it really made a big difference. Yeah, that looks great, actually. That has a nice smooth finish, and I'd be okay putting some color right on this side. This side, however, maybe one more layer. And it's not gunking up my sandpaper too bad at all so far. The automotive primer. This came out actually smoother than the black primer. I might actually have to start switching to this. This feels great. It covered really good, came out really smooth, and it has a really nice surface to it already. So I'm excited to see what happens when we get some color on this one. The plastic primer, and again, my sandpaper's not clogging up at all really yet. Makes a good amount of dust, but it's fine dust and it's not clogging at all. So it left a little bit of a rough texture on this one. This one's really nice and smooth already. And it didn't really do much for filling in layer lines. This one was already pretty smooth as it was. As for adhesion goes, I'm really excited to see what this one does. Very easy to sand too. Again, sandpaper still looks great. Now I'm gonna skip the filler primer because I know what's gonna happen a little bit with this one. We're gonna go right to the Ultra 2-in-1 Flat White Primer. So you can almost hear the scratching, right? And then on this side, I don't know if you can hear that difference between it rubbing on the layer lines and it rubbing on the smooth primer. So that's sanded down. I got that actually pretty smooth, but it might be a little hard to see. There's still a couple little tiny imperfections in here. Now I can do two things. I can keep going on and sanding. Actually, I do three things. I can keep sanding this because there is still some I can cut down. And I can sit here and just cut it down, cut it down, cut it down. I can throw more wood filler on it, a very thin layer, and sand it down again. Or I can keep building up primer on it. Now, a nice little trick to do, because since this is all white, it's a little hard to tell where your low spots are. And this is a little trick from like doing body work and stuff. All you do, it's always a good idea to maybe keep two different colors of primer around. So what I'm gonna do is take my Sanibel primer, it's black, and I'm gonna just kind of dust the top of it. And we're gonna let that dry, and it should dry pretty quickly since it was such a light coat. And while that's drying, let's go and take a look at the filler primer. And again, my sandpaper, my 150 grit is still pretty much brand new. It still feels great. I've only been using that side. So let's do the side that we pre-sanded. So that actually gunked up my sandpaper a good amount already. However, this is nice and smooth. Now at certain angles you can still see a lot of the layer lines. I didn't spend too much time sanding this down. I only got the real, big trouble spots. And this really wasn't the best print quality to begin with. However, it still doesn't look that bad. I think another coat or two of filler primer and this would be pretty smooth as it is. But throwing filler, wood filler, or any type of epoxy or Bondo on this would just be a nightmare with all this detail. Now the side we didn't actually prep real well. It's not treating the sandpaper too well. So that really didn't make too much of a difference at all. It really let the layer lines bleed through pretty bad. I would need to coat this up and build this up a lot more. Rinse, repeat, sand, rinse, it would have to be, you actually see where one of my layer separate, little bit of under extrusion was happening there. So that's a little bit of a problem. And actually I could probably crack this part in half too. So we're just gonna get rid of that. An analysis, I think, for filler primer. Like, you're gonna have to use a little bit more. It kind of gunks up your sandpaper, but for all these little detailed parts, it might kind of be necessary because it's gonna be just a nightmare getting in here and sanding. So if you're already using it and you like using it, that's fine. But being able to just go and pre-sand your parts and not have to use something like filler primer, which can add up pretty quickly, I think is a pretty worthwhile benefit of this. So we're gonna come back over here to the black primer, and it actually looks like it's pretty dry already. So the reason I did a separate color was now I can do this. And as you sand away, what's gonna happen is this, it's gonna leave the black paint in all the recesses that you need to continue to sand down. So it's actually already coming out kind of uneven. It wasn't perfectly dry, but it's still giving us a pretty good idea. And as you sand this and you start to cut through it, you're gonna be able to sand the black away, but what you can't reach yet is gonna stay. It might be hard to see, but there's some spots here that are still very dark black, like right there, a little bit in there, a little over here, and those are spots that my sandpaper isn't touching because it's not actually going into those holes. So you keep sanding away, and eventually you'll start to get rid of all this black. And what you'll do is you'll go back and forth between colors, and it builds up layers. So you'll put a little bit of white on it, sand it, put a little black on it, sand it, and it'll start to build up these layers where you can see where your imperfections are. So this one wasn't too bad, but there's still some spots I definitely need to cut down a little bit more. And eventually we'll be able to get rid of all of that. And this is already looking pretty good. I think if I did one more coat of primer, white primer on this, it would actually fill in a lot of those little imperfections. And this would be pretty good and ready for paint. And I'll probably do that before we actually go into the painting process for all of these. So guys, I think that does it kind of for the sanding and the priming and the prep. Just a couple things I want to iterate. Again, if I haven't already, this is kind of a long video. Prep is key. However much time you spend in this stage, it will pay in spades on your final product. If there are imperfections and if there's layer lines now, painting it and clear coating it, it's not gonna hide it. They're gonna bleed through, especially if you're doing something on like a faceplate where it's gonna be a metallic. Metallics just absolutely love to show layer lines. So you have to be really careful with this stuff. Put time in now, fix your imperfections now, because once you start painting it, you're gonna have to strip that paint down. It becomes a nightmare. So take your time in this, just do good prep work. That's really where it's key. Now, depending on what I was gonna do, I would kind of lump these two in with each other, the Sanibel Primer and the Automotive Primer. They both went on pretty smooth. They weren't really good at filling layer lines, but they came out really nice and smooth and are easy to sand and easy to apply. The filler primer is filler primer. It's a high build formula. It can gunk up sandpaper quick, but for really detailed, hard to reach areas, it's really not the worst thing in the world for hiding layer lines. So you're gonna have to get out there and experiment with this stuff. This ultra flat white primer from Rust-Oleum, it operates, I'd say, one step under the filler primer. It still fills in pretty good. It's easy to sand away. And I kind of like using this stuff. It covers really well. It'll cover really any color you want it to. So I would kind of put these into a grouping together, almost as like a more high build kind of volume. This plastic primer, I've yet to see its benefits. So I'm excited to get some color on these to see just how it bonds and kind of adheres to itself, and what kind of like adhesion we get for the paint, and if it helps at all with our smoothness and finish. So I'm excited for this. Now, as we go through this, I'm gonna paint these in different colors. We're gonna do some parts in like a nice gloss. We're gonna do some parts in probably like a satin, and we'll do some parts in a metallic. That's why I painted a couple different parts in the same primer. So keep an eye out for that video where we go through and actually start painting and throwing some base color on these. And as you probably already noticed, I sanded some parts better than I sanded others because I want you guys to see how the layer lines bleed through and what you can see with different colors. Now, that doesn't mean that a base coat can't cover up a little of those layer lines. I think the red gloss red I use, this actually fills in layer lines a little bit by itself too, because it's that high build, ultra coverage primer kind of stuff, the same as the white. And it will help a little bit, but you need to know what paints do and don't do that. Like I said, metallics are thin and they don't fill in well at all. So thank you so much for watching, guys. If you want to go talk more nerd and learn more painting, cosplay, 3D printing, anything like that, there's a link for my Discord down below. It's free to join. Go ahead and talk nerd. There's already 100 or something people in there, all exchanging tips and tricks, and it's a great place for beginners. It's a great place that you want to expand your knowledge. So if you want to be part of that community, please go join. It's been a lot of fun already, and it's a very active little Discord so far. If you're interested in more of these videos and you like this kind of content and you want to support me, I did start a Patreon account. There's a link down below. Go look at it if you're interested. If not, totally fine. Thank you so much for watching. I think that's it. Stay tuned for the second part of this video where I go over painting, and then we'll build up from there. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.